What is up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo football podcast. It is officially draft week, and we are kicking it off with our final 7-round Bills mock draft right here on Shout, just 3 days before we come to Turning Stone Resort Casino, New York Rec and Social Club. It is a live draft watch party, Ryan. We've never done this before, but we're going out day one, Verona, New York, Turning Stone, New York Rec and Social Club. We're going to be hanging out with all the Shout fans that can come out to Turning Stone on Thursday night.
Yeah, cannot wait, Matt. It's going to be fun. Something new, like you said. Some live play-by-play in the first round, and then obviously coming back again after the Bills make their pick.
So Ryan's got his audio situation all figured out, we think. We got a new microphone that it's going to have to be ordered, but we'll figure that out. So as long as you can hear him, I can hear him. He sounds pretty good to me. So, we spent over the weekend, we did our big draft preview show that usually gives way to our final 7-round mock draft that'll appear on Syracuse.com and NewYorkUpstate.com later tonight and into tomorrow morning. You can check it out fully there. So I want to start with giving my thought process going into this final mock draft, because there's a bunch of different ways that we can go that Brandon Beane can go. We've talked about all of those different ways over the past couple of weeks on Shout. The big idea for me is there's likely not going to be a difference maker at 30, at least one that, listen, there might be somebody that you think has a chance to be a starter or an impact player, but I don't know if there's going to be one that has a bona fide first round grade on your board. So I think the way I went into this is like, I am willing to trade back because I want to try to accumulate capital, thinking as if I were Brandon Beane, to try to be aggressive, because that sweet spot of the draft, Ryan, maybe like 30 to 55. The Bills won't really get to participate in that outside of pick number 30 if they make that pick there. This trade back and then several other trades up yielded 4 players in the top 70 picks. It's a lot. It had my head spinning at times over the last couple of days, but I think that if the Bills can do that, that's a bunch of dart throws that I think you get excited about once you roll the balls out at training camp.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the Bills don't have 10 spots for rookies, and they're entering this draft with 10 picks. So if they can maneuver up and down the board and finish out with 4 picks in the top 70, Brandon Beane's going to be thrilled, because, like you said, that's where you're going to get impact players. There's an ESPN Insider article recently that talked about this draft class and the lack of blue chip prospects. The fact that the player that you're getting around pick 10 is going to be the same quality of player at the end of round 1, which, that's probably music to the Bills' ears in a year where they're picking at number 30. They don't need to maybe make a drastic trade up, and they're going to feel pretty good about whoever's falling in their laps around that point. Or they could potentially trade down as well in that scenario as you had it play out. So I think the Bills are in a good spot now with 3 picks in the first 2 rounds. But if they can land another pick in the top 70, they'll be all set, and they'll have 4 guys that potentially could become major contributors as rookies.
So let me set up the scenario and how it played out. I'm not going to show each round here on the big board, because the screen grabs that I had, they were very tiny, and I don't think people will be able to see them. But you'll get the general idea. Obviously, we've been following along during the draft process. All of the big name edge rushers are off the board, including the last one to go, Donovan Izaraku out of Boston College. He goes at 27 to Baltimore. Some of the wide receivers that people have been talking about, maybe potentially the Bills being, considering Ted McMillan, Luther Burden, Matthew Golden, all off the board before 27. So you start to look at the defensive tackles, Ryan. Derek Harmon goes off the board at 25, mini run. Kenneth Grant goes off the board at 26. And I think what this does is it now gives you this pool of cornerbacks. And how it fell is the only cornerbacks that were off the board when the Bills picked at 30 were Jedi Barron out of Texas and Will Johnson out of Michigan. And it'll be interesting about Will Johnson, by the way, because you mentioned the report that came out about some of the Bills' interest. There's reports from multiple reporters that Will Johnson, some maybe knee concerns, could have him drop considerably in this draft. So we'll see where he goes. Maybe that pushes him completely out of the first round. But the Bills have their pick of a cornerback. And so what I was thinking is, all right, listen to some of the offers. And the the one that I use, sticktothemodel.com. It's nice. It gives you a bunch of different offers. You can then make your own offers to teams. And so what I ended up doing was accepting an offer from the Jacksonville Jaguars that sends 35, pick 35. So they move back 7 spots. 4 names at cornerback on the board remain: Maxwell Hairston, Shavon Ravel, Trey Amos, and Morrison out of Notre Dame. So I'm thinking 7 picks back, even if there's a run on cornerbacks, I think I probably get lucky and get one of those guys. And here's the deal. The deal is for the 36th pick. So you're moving back 8 picks, excuse me. And you add pick 70 in the 3rd round. And why that's important is it gives you now that end mark where now you have 4 picks in that range. And then with the additional day 3 picks, because you're adding 2 for the price of 1, now you can get aggressive about moving back up. And I do that. So the Bills move back. The Jaguars come up for Tyler Booker, tackle guard out of Alabama. The Bills end up getting Trey Amos, and they actually had their pick between him and Max Hairston. I went with Amos. In that scenario, what do you like for the Bills, knowing the work that you've done on Amos and Hairston? Different players, obviously a burner in Hairston, a little bit smaller. Amos has the wingspan. He's got the hands. He's got the arm length, all those things. Who do you like in that spot?
Yeah, Amos of the 2, without question. Also a better fit for the system, the scheme that the Bills run. A more willing tackler, maybe a better tackler is a way of putting it. Hairston is a little undersized, a smaller player. That's why he runs, though, a 4.28. So there's benefits to both players in that scenario. But of the 2, Amos is my favorite corner. And in fact, if you told me in your mock draft the Bills moved up a few spots to select Trey Amos, I wouldn't be opposed to that. So to be able to get him in the pick 36, I believe you said, would be a great get for the Bills at that point in time in this draft. I do see in the comments here from Mary, trade up to get one of the D tackles in the mid-20s. Definitely, I could see a lot of fans being upset based on how it played out in your mock draft. If you had that mini run of Harmon and Grant at 25 and 26, and the Bills kind of sat there. I will say, though, man, I don't know if you saw this today. There's been a few insiders that have been talking about Harmon having some injury concerns that could push him further down in this draft, where before I thought he was a top 15, top 20 player. And, if he does fall near Buffalo, maybe injuries really are a concern. I saw Ben Albright confirm the report, say something along the same lines about Harmon. And now I'm blanking on who said it first. It might have been in an ESPN Plus article. I'll have to double check that, but some injury concerns with Harmon. So teams will know that going into this draft. If he falls, there's a reason for it. But in your mock, to be able to get Trey Amos at pick 36, great get for the Bills right off of the start.
Yeah, and I honestly, it'll depend on the cost, right? Like the Bills have a bunch of day 3 capital that they can use to get aggressive if there's a guy that they really like there. But what I like about this approach, and you'll see how aggressive I get in the 2nd round here in a minute, you add another asset, right? Like getting 70, and then you can move up multiple times in the 2nd round if you deem it necessary to get the kind of players that fit into what you want to do. So let's get to the next pick here. So the Bills, they make the pick at 36, and then it's kind of all about watching what happens next, because defensive tackle, wide receiver, as we talked about, safety could be in the mix here as well. If one of those top line safeties hangs around, like you think about, like a couple of years ago, Brian Branch is a great example. Everybody's waiting for him to go in the 1st round. He doesn't end up going there. And then the Lions, who have now, been really well known for their ability to find really talented players. And we'll talk about another Lion player before this show is over that's in the news today. But they go and they land Brian Branch at a crazy number in the 2nd round of that year's draft. And he's been an all-pro level player for them. So that could be in consideration too. So the Bills waited out. Edge rusher is what I'm really looking at, because there's a couple that are on the board that I think are worth watching. Nick Scourton out of Texas A&M, and then Landon Jackson, the edge rusher out of Arkansas. And at 40 to the Saints, Scourton goes. And then I'm kind of just watching it because there's a couple defensive tackles that are on the board that I think would be interesting for the Bills. Tyleik Williams is available at 40. Landon Jackson, TJ Sanders, and Alfred Collins. So I'm kind of just hanging out saying there's a lot of guys in the mix. As things go down the line here to 45, Tyleek Williams goes to the Colts. And so now Tyleek Williams was that dream scenario if he had somehow lasted to pick, wherever the Bills were picking next. I'll get to that in a second. But because Landon Jackson's still on the board, I get aggressive here with this one. And I send in a deal with Atlanta, picks 56 to move up 10 spots, 132 and 173. So a fourth and a fifth rounder, and then a future sixth to get up to 46 to get Landon Jackson. What do you think about that move?
I'm all for it because, again, there's not room for 10 rookies on this roster, in my opinion. So to maneuver and take some of those day 3 picks to go up and get your guy, I'm all for it. I expect Brandon Beane to be aggressive on day 2 of this draft, especially if there's a few guys that he likes. So I could see it playing out just like that. Landon Jackson is a player that the Bills have done a ton of homework on. He has admitted it himself. He said the Bills and the Commanders are the 2 teams he's talked to the most in the pre-draft process. He talked to the Bills at least 8 times. Were his words. He's a clean prospect, hence why there was no 30 visit for him. The Bills know enough about him that they didn't feel the need to probably bring him in. Some good pass rush juice. And, a month ago, there was conversations that he could be one of those players that goes late in round 1. So to be able to get him in round 2, you're addressing a need. The Bills are always looking to upgrade their edge rushers. And then you're also getting a player that has maybe first round value on the Bills board.
Carl Tommen, checking in with a super chat. And listen, this is something that I think there's going to be a portion of the fan base that if Kenneth Grant falls into that 24 to 30 range and the Bills don't get aggressive to go up and get him, that's a lot of Bills fans' guy in this draft, right? It has been for a couple months. And Carl writes, if Kenneth Grant will be off the board by 26, Beane had better make a trade with the Vikings to jump up to 24 and get him. D-line is more important than CB. Are you in on that trade, Ryan, if it requires to trade next year's 3rd round draft pick and a 4th this year to get up to that spot? Because 30 to 24, it's going to cost some draft capital.
It is. I almost wonder, though, if this year it won't cost as much with teams knowing it's not as strong of a draft class, knowing that some talent that you have graded high could be much lower on another team's board. So this might be a year where you can go from 30 into the mid-20s without giving up a major haul just because teams are looking for a few additional assets without having to break the bank. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out because, again, we're getting closer and closer to draft night. So, we're seeing a lot of smoke coming out. I saw a mock draft in CBS Sports, Jonathan Jones, where Shedeur Sanders was not a first-round pick. You're seeing some linebackers getting talked about, getting pushed up into the end of the first round in Buffalo's range. So, it's silly season. We'll see how it all plays out. But I do think based on the talent of the players in this year's draft, the Bills would be able to maybe move up from 30 into the mid-20s without giving a traditional haul or what you would see on those, the Jimmy Johnson trade charts or whatever the most popular ones are at this time.
So the Bills go Landon Jackson. One of the reasons I like this player too is he reminds me, reading through his profile and hearing you talk about him just a minute ago, he reminds me of like Michael Hoyt in a way, like a versatile piece that you could play up and down your defensive line, maybe even stand him up and play him at linebacker at times. I know he's really good as a pass rusher, but you can get creative with how you deploy a player of this kind of A, physicality, and B, athletic profile. I like his, going back to the Senior Bowl, I mean, him shining throughout the week, him shining in the game. We know how much the Bills value that production in that week. And that could be a Senior Bowl favorite for the Bills. All right, let's move on to the next pick. So they take Jackson. That pick lands at pick number 46. And now the Bills have their 62nd pick. And I'm kind of looking here because there's a couple of options at defensive tackle, TJ Sanders out of South Carolina and Alfred Collins out of Texas, who, spent a lot of time waiting for his chance behind Tavondre Swift and some other big interior players in Texas the last couple of years, had a chance to play this year and had a breakout season in a lot of ways. And so I'm kind of watching to see how this thing plays out. Sanders goes immediately at 47. So I'm kind of waiting. A couple of these teams in here had already taken a defensive tackle, or maybe they're probably good at that spot. Once Darius Alexander goes to the Packers at 54, I get on the phone. I make a call with the Chargers to move up from 62 to 55 to take Alfred Collins out of Texas. It costs, in addition to 62, 143 and 170, and then it brought back 158 as well. So again, some more capital on the way back to use to be aggressive. What do you think about this move and Collins as a potential target?
Collins. So after the Collins pick, you've addressed Buffalo's three biggest needs, arguably, with players that could realistically contribute right out of the gate. Collins is a player the Bills met with at the Combine. Like you said, tape was really good this year, waited for his opportunity, played very well. So now you've upgraded your defensive line significantly with your last two picks. You've upgraded cornerback number 2. You have some really good. You have a good mentor for him now in Trey White, back with the team on a 1-year deal. So you've kind of hit a home run with those first 3 picks. If you're a Bills fan, you're probably feeling really good about that and just seeing how the rest of the draft plays out in general. So Collins, the player, would be a great addition to this team where you ended up getting him. He is in a bundle of players that I expect to go on day 2 of the draft in regard to the defensive tackle position. I think there's a lot of different flavors out there depending on what your team is trying to do. And Collins would be a great addition to Buffalo's defensive line. You wouldn't have to start him necessarily this year. You could get him in that rotation, though, very, very quickly and have him play a sizable role.
Comment here on Landon Jackson that he's much bigger than Hoyt. Hoyt actually came into the league as a defensive tackle. So Jackson, obviously at 6'6", 2 inches taller than Hoyt, but in terms of weight and size profile, and I think just the way that they play, similar. So I like that's neither here nor there. I don't think that they're necessarily going to be the same kind of player, but what I like about Jackson is that you could potentially do multiple things with him. He doesn't fall into one bucket. Whereas like when they drafted AJ Epinesa years ago, it felt like, man, you are really putting yourself in a corner into how you're going to use this player, right? Like they decided to change his body from the jump. They were going to ask him to be a specific kind of player, where I feel like this defensive coaching staff has evolved a little bit on the defensive line. Hoyt is a great example, and they're much more willing to use guys in different ways, especially with how they use them as rushers. And that's kind of more what I meant on that, in that department. Now on Collins, what I think his greatest asset is for the Bills in this spot, in this range, is you're taking a one-tech defensive tackle most of the time. You know, you want him to add some juice as a pass rusher, but what you really want him to do is to be a factor for offensive lines to have to game plan for in terms of double teams, like planning for him in the run game, because now adding a 6'6", 332 pounder next to Ed Oliver changes the math for how Ed Oliver can be deployed himself. You already have Rousseau on the edge. You're adding in Joey Bosa in this mock, a Landon Jackson, who I think is interesting as well. To me, addressing defensive tackle and edge in the first 2 of the first 3 picks with guys that have a chance to be impact players, to your earlier point from the jump, is really important.
It's huge, especially when you look at, Joey Bosa being on this D-line and not wanting to have him play major reps. You want to be able to give him a breather, and you can bring in a Landon Jackson who can help in that regard, especially with Hoyt's suspension. AJ Epinesa is on an expiring deal. You don't know what you have in Javon Solomon. So there's a lot of question marks in the edge room, and to get someone in here on a 4-year rookie deal that you feel like can win off the edge and can be someone that could really learn from Bosa, from Greg Rousseau, good in terms of setting the edge, which is something almost a must for the Bills. There's a lot of reasons that you'd really like him. You'd really like Collins plugging up the middle there, a true run stopper that has some juice as a pass rusher as well. And then adding Amos on the other side of Christian Benford. Like you said originally, you're throwing darts at the board, and those are promising darts that really could pay off not just in 2025, but long-term for this team.
All right, so while we were talking about Jackson here, let's back up a bit to him, and a couple comments here asking about Ohio State's JT Tuimalu, who I think is a really interesting prospect. I think if we go back to, I can't remember if he was on Bruce Feldman's freak list, I'd have to bring that up. We could go back and look at that for the 2024 season, but I do know the draft stock on him was through the roof going into the season. Maybe the production in his final year at Ohio State didn't scream, first round pick or fringe first round pick, but it feels like Tuamala's stock is rising here over the last 2 weeks. I've seen him kind of bantied about among some of the national media members. What are your thoughts on him and him as a potential fit? Whether it be Tuamalo or Jackson fitting into that maybe first, second round edge rusher spot.
Yeah, 100% comfortable taking him in round 2 of this draft. There's a few players I feel good about, and he is one of them. So he did have production on the field. I thought his tape was really good. I actually think at times maybe he is being slept on in this draft class a little bit. If you are looking for production off the edge, and there's things you can nitpick about every one of these prospects, but definitely would be a welcome addition in round 2, much like Landon Jackson would be for this team.
Tuamalo, I just want to bring this up from Dane Brugler's draft guide. A flexible, long athlete. He creates lift and extension through contact. He uses his football GPS and short area agility to close on the ball carrier. Frequently saw four hands as a pass rusher. Opponents knew he was the main threat on a talented Buckeyes defensive line, but he needs to develop more seamless counter sequencing when left one-on-one on the edge. And I think a player like this, he's ranked just above Jackson as Brugler's edge rusher number 8 on his board. A player like this, those are the kind of things that don't scare you when you have Joey Bosa in the room. You have Rousseau, who's now spent the last couple of years downloading from Von Miller, probably able to pass a lot of that along to any rookie who is probably going to join Rousseau out at Von Miller's pass rush summit this offseason, whoever they take. So I think Tuamala, I don't hate that idea at all. That's a fun one.
Yeah, Bosa would probably love to mentor another Ohio State kid as well. He'd probably be all for that, welcoming a player like that in the room and, teaching him everything that he possibly can in that year that he's here.
All right. So 3 big picks down, sitting there at number 70 after the Bills select Alfred Williams or Alfred Collins, excuse me. So 15 picks to go. And honestly, it can go in any direction. I'll shout out some of the names that are going off the board here. Xavier Watts would be somebody that would be in the mix I'd be looking at, but he goes at 57 to the Carolina Panthers. Omar Norman Lott out of Tennessee. I don't know if the Bills are going to entertain another defensive tackle that soon, but I do have them getting another defensive tackle in this class, and we'll get to that in a second. Kansas City grabs Caleb Johnson, the running back. Darian Porter, the cornerback, goes to Philadelphia at 64. The Bills now 5 picks away. There are a ton of really intriguing wide receivers. Jalen Noel out of Iowa State, Jack Besh out of TCU, and then Ryan Talbot, one of his guys, Jalen Royals. That ends up being the pick. Noel goes, Besh goes at 69, and then Royals falls to the Bills at 70, and you're all smiles.
All smiles, would be thrilled. My favorite wide receiver on day 2 of this draft. If the Bills get him, they're in good shape. He's not the burner that Golden is. He's not running a 4.29. He runs a 4.4, though. That's pretty good. He's a very good route runner. Has a nice route tree. Does everything very well. Good hands. Can win deep. He would be a perfect addition to that wide receiver room in terms of you wouldn't have to throw him out there and expect major contributions on a regular basis in terms of his snap count. But when you have him on the field, he's going to have the opportunity to make big plays for you down the field.
So next up, the Bills grab a wide receiver. And listen, I think Royals is, before we get to the next one, I think Royals is the kind of guy that, gets into your system and gets a chance to learn behind a bunch of guys that are already entrenched. I think Khalil Shakir being there, Curtis Samuel being there. You'd love it if Matt Collins was probably still in the mix as a guy that's, been a vet, talking to so many guys last year that leaned on him. Tyrell Shavers was one of them that really kind of gravitated towards Matt Collins. But I think Royals has the kind of skill set that you get excited about. He's got some 4.4 speed. Developing route tree, from everything I've read, the route tree isn't like pro ready, but I don't think you need it to be. If he could be competitive on the outside when he lines up across from Keon Coleman, that's what I think you'd want to inject into this offense. And listen, call me crazy, I'm not closing the door on a significant ish role for Curtis Samuel in 2025. Joe Brady, he's one of his guys. And I think as long as you have that kind of connection with the play caller, you're going to be given opportunity after opportunity. And if he could stay healthy, that's the big key for me. If he's available and healthy, I think Samuel factors in. And to me, that's a perfect setting for a guy like Royals or whoever they take in this range to be able to come in and try to earn playing time. But if you don't, you get to learn behind a bunch of these guys.
Absolutely. And Curtis Samuel, one thing, availability is key for him. The talent's there. The ability is certainly there. He showed flashes of it last season after he seemed to be recovered from the turf toe injury, but he got, behind the eight ball because of that in the beginning of the year and felt like a non-factor for most of it. If he can stay healthy, though, it wouldn't shock me whatsoever if he had a nice year, if that helped, obviously, with Joshua Palmer coming in. It'll open things up for Khalil Shakir. And then I'm still expecting big things from Dalton Kincaid as well, considering how significant of an injury he was playing through last season.
All right, so sitting here with the next pick on the board, 109, which the Bills still hold in this mock draft. And so I'm kind of letting the board play out and whatever is there. Like there's a couple of positions, right? Like tight end is something I think they're going to address on day 3. Linebacker, potentially running back. Safety has not been addressed yet. And on the board here, somebody that I haven't spent a ton of time on, but the more I read up on him, the more I liked him. And it's Virginia's, Jonas Sanker. This is a guy that, 4.48 40-yard dash, decent athleticism score according to NFL.com. If you look at his 2024 season, first team All ACC, led the team with 98 tackles, 9.5 TFL, so he can get in the backfield, started all 12 games with 2 sacks, an interception, and 4 pass breakups. What do you know about Sanker, and what do you think about the Bills waiting till this spot in the draft to address safety?
Yeah, not a ton on him, just because I was looking more into the players that the Bills have done some homework on through visits. But promising upside at that position. You mentioned the athleticism, the tackles for loss, the instincts. He does some things pretty well. And at this point in the draft, you're looking to add players, not just for 2025, but for long term. I know that Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane have saying the praises of Taylor Rapp, but who knows how long he'll be in Buffalo. His contract's up at the end of the year. He plays a very physical style. Availability has been an issue for him in big games. So the Bills have to think life after Taylor Rapp. You have Cole Bishop, where you loved him enough to select him in round 2 last year, but you still need to see what he can put on tape. They go out, they sign a promising player from the Commanders who had a really nice season in 2022, had some injuries the last few years, and then obviously you bring back Hamlin on a 1-year deal. You have talent in that room, but you do need to add more into the equation, so Sanker would make plenty of sense.
So I'm just thinking, this is what I was thinking when I went through this process. I bring up the draft profile, right? And I think about being Brandon Beane sitting at a desk, maybe not spending a lot of time on this kid, and getting the scouting report from one of his area scouts pushed onto his desk. And this is what the bullets read: possesses NFL measurables and frame, highly active with downhill default as a run defender. First checked. Yeah. Willing to run the alleys and strike with authority. Plays with good route anticipation in man and eager eyes in zone. Instinctive with plus burst to close. Here's the biggest bullet of them all, though. Deserves attention for his play on kick coverage and as a gunner. Ryan, the Bills are going to have needs on special teams. I don't think it's anything that they should be specifically eyeing players for, but when you can kind of marry the upside as a defensive or offensive player with the ability to contribute on special teams, those are guys that like tick up, I think, a little bit more on Brandon Beane's board.
Sure. And all the positives that you just mentioned and rattled off for the defensive part of it, those are all promising for him. But you throw in the special teams, special teams was so important to Sean McDermott early in his, it still is, don't get me wrong, but he invested sizable money for just special teams players. Your Tyler Matikevich's that they had here for multiple seasons, and other players that specifically were there, Saran Neal, that they would keep re-signing, and Reggie Gilliam's the fullback, but he's been on this roster for quite a few years because of his special teams play as well. They kind of have gone away from it the last few years with the new kickoff rules. They would maybe didn't have the strongest special teams units the last few seasons under Smiley. I really do think that making that a plus unit again is important to Sean McDermott, especially with the kickoffs moving back 5 yards, more possible returns. So you can bring someone in here that can then contribute immediately on special teams. That earns them that game day jersey, and that's huge.
All right, so next pick up on the board for the Bills, they have 3 remaining, 140 in the 5th round. And I'm going to the big guys again, Ryan. I'm going big on the interior, the defensive line, 6'2", 332-pounder. He, a lot of people have watched him because they've watched a lot of Derek Harmon, and Jamari Caldwell played next to him. He is a big space-eating one technique, not as tall as Collins, but somebody that I think fits what the Bills want to try to do on their interior, the defensive line. Just reading between the lines, everything that they've said this offseason, it might not be Caldwell. They might go with another defensive tackle, like maybe a Joshua Farmer falls into an area like in the 109 range, and they decide to go that department. But the idea here is to go 2 defensive tackles, give yourself, go like the draft approach from 2022 when you went Kyer Elam, then backed it up with Christian Benford. Do it at defensive tackle in this draft, and Caldwell will stick it out in the board at this spot.
Yeah, and Joshua Farmer, obviously at that point I'd love. I think he's going to be a day 2 pick though when all is said and done. Caldwell, though, Jamari Caldwell is a player that the Bills probably ended up loving quite a bit when they were watching tape on Derek Harmon. He does pop on screen, does a lot of things well. Bills met with him at the combine to be able to get him at that point. You feel really good about this. You already have a lot of bodies in your defensive tackle room, but one is like a Zion Logue who won't necessarily be on this roster this season. So you can say, okay, we can get a big upgrade in terms of our depth in Caldwell, and we'll replace, a player that might be a practice squad type of addition or just land elsewhere. But you're still adding to that room in terms of the talent, in terms of the ability. 2 young guys to grow there on the interior would make this fun to watch as well, because you don't always hit on both players, as you mentioned, with the Elam, the Benford, the Kyle Williams from many, many years ago, how they hit on him in day 3. They busted on an earlier pick at D tackle. So it happens all the time in this draft. Double dipping at defensive tackle would not upset me whatsoever, especially based on how many D tackles they've looked at, both 3 tech and 1 tech.
So the next one here, Brashard Smith, running back out of SMU. What I really liked about him is, converted wide receiver, could give you something in the pass game, which is something that they're always looking for with their running backs. And listen, maybe the Bills don't even address running back in this draft, which would be crazy because it's such a deep draft at that position. But it comes down to, all right, what's going to be the ultimate result of the James Cook situation? A lot of people asking us all day today, is James Cook reporting for the offseason voluntary program? I did not see him in the pictures that the Bills posted. Doesn't necessarily mean that he wasn't there, but obviously, it might be a clue that he wasn't. We'll talk to Brandon Bean tomorrow. Where are you at with the running back spot a couple days out from the draft in terms of how much do you feel like the Bills need to seriously consider addressing it with one of their picks in this draft to protect against the James Cook situation? But what do you do if you draft a guy with a decent asset and then James Cook remains on the roster? Are you going to roster 4 running backs?
Right. That's why if you're going to do it on day 3, do it with one of your last picks. Someone that you give an opportunity to in camp, but realistically, are they really going to beat out the top 3 that Buffalo has? No, minus an injury taking place to one of those backs, it would be tough for them to make this roster unless they have kick return, punt return ability as well, or special teams ability as a gunner, something along those lines. So I'm not opposed to taking a back in this draft class, but I would want it to be on day 3 late in this draft, which is how you have it playing out. And a lot of the backs that they have looked at, which haven't been a ton, are all projected to be day 3 picks. The Texas running back that they brought in for a top 30. Travis Etienne's brother, again, out of Georgia, another day 3 type of player. So these are all, it's different variations, different flavors in terms of what you're looking for. from the running back position. But if you're going to do it on day 3, late on day 3, where even if they don't make this roster, you hope that you can get them, sneak them onto your practice squad some way, somehow.
So Brian Chilson's asking a good question. And I was thinking on Wednesday, we do like an actual live mock draft where we talk about more scenarios, like a quick hitter, like we did last year. But I will hit on this one because it's really interesting. What do you do if Amon is on the board at 30? And let's say Derek Harmon slides because of a potential shoulder, which is the report out there. And you have your pick of like 4 corners. Like, what's the pick there in that scenario?
Honestly, whoever Brandon Beane has the highest, and I'm not opposed to a safety at pick 30. I've seen some, people starting to sour on the safety a little bit in terms of a lot of hype there for this player, and he's good, but is he elite, and is he someone that you can really count on? There's a lot of highlights, but there's also parts of the game that needs improvement. Might not be the impact player that you necessarily expect at pick 30. That said, if the Bills have him as a first-round grade, and we've talked about this, teams might only have about a dozen players in this draft with a first-round grade. You go with the first-round grade. If you're the Bills, you go with any position that you have a first-round grade on, obviously outside of quarterback, which I don't think they're going to have any quarterbacks with a first-round grade in this draft class available to them at pick 30. So, yeah, just BPA at that point, is because safety is not as pressing of a need as cornerback or defensive tackle in this scenario, but it is still a sneaky need that you need to address. And if you can add a premier player, if they think he's comparable to a Brian Branch in terms of what he could mean to this defense, yeah, by all means, go out and get your safety.
Our guy Daryl watching on YouTube with a hot take, dropping it in the comments here. The Bills trade a 4th rounder on Friday, it would be, and James Cook for another late second so they can draft Ohio State running back Trevion Henderson, 5'10", 202. Great athleticism score over at NFL.com. 4.43 40, 152 10-yard split, 38.5 vertical jump, 10.8 broad jump. The comp is Aaron Jones by Lance Zierlein. What's that?
A back that's still going strong, in fact.
Exactly. And here's a quote from his draft profile. They love him in that program in Ohio State. He's unselfish, really productive, can play on all 3 downs, and is about the team first. Sounds like a Brandon Beane guy.
Absolutely. Henderson is a player that long-term I think is going to be a stud for a team. If the scenario that he laid out there were to happen, though, my only problem would be I don't know if Henderson could take on James Cook's role as a rookie. That first season where you're going to need some players to step up, and you know how important Cook was to this offense last year. Long term, do I think he could step up and play a major role? 100%. But as a rookie, I'm not sure it necessarily pan out that way.
All right, my last pick in the mock draft here. I go tight end, 21-year-old Alabama tight end out of Scranton, Pennsylvania, CJ Dupre. The strength of his game is in the blocking department. And when you're adding a late day 3 tight end, and it might end up being a UDFA tight end as well, I think they're going to really value the guys that can do multiple things, probably line up in the backfield as a blocker. Dupre kind of fit that category. I don't go linebacker, Ryan, which I would imagine some Bills fans are like, you got to get a linebacker in this draft. We heard some of that on Saturday night at Wingnuts from some fans that really want some more depth and competition brought in for Eddie Ulofoshio and Joe Andreessen and Dorian Williams. You have Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard set to start. What do you think if the Bills come out of this draft and don't add a linebacker? Somebody mentioning here, Sean Dolak, he may not go get drafted. So he's somebody that the Bills can potentially look at as a UDFA as well.
Yeah, it would be a potential scenario that would
play out there. Did you control the dogs, Talbot?
All excited because the kids just came home, so now I'm getting the attacked as well. I still think they draft a linebacker. I think they want some competition. You look at the Chris Paul Jr. I think he's a player that's a riser. The one's going to go before the Bills would probably want to select him in this draft. Sean Dolak, they have done their homework on as well. I think Dolak goes in round 5. I know there are some draft analysts that don't have him being selected. I think there's going to be a team that likes the tape that he's put out there know that he's a little bit undersized, but there's been a lot of guys in this league that, despite being a little undersized, can fly around the field and make plays for you. So, Dolak, with all the picks that the Bills have, 8 out of their 10, I know this is based on your scenario where you've traded a lot of picks and moved around. I would try to spend one on a Dolak or a different linebacker on day 3.
One of our regulars, Man of War, here on YouTube. Would the Bills be this desperate to pick defensive line players, 3 defensive linemen selected in 8 picks in this mock, if they had not signed up 2 players who won't be playing the first 6 games? And honestly, Ryan, no matter what they did in free agency, one of my biggest complaints about the Bills' build over the last couple of years has been their reluctance to add in the draft because of the capital they've used in free agency on their defensive line. And it's great when you go out and you sign a Daquan Jones, but I think you should bring somebody in that you want to develop alongside that player. And,
right.
they've found themselves year in and year out in a spot where they have to go out and figure out answers on their defensive line. The latest examples of that were Jordan Phillips and Quentin Jefferson this past season. I think you go out there and you throw a bunch of darts at the board and see if a couple of them don't stick. The worst problem in the world is trying to figure out what to do with players if you have to release them because you don't have a roster spot for them. But that's a healthy roster when you're having to make those decisions.
Yeah, and, in the case of Hoyt, if he maybe did not have that 6-game suspension, maybe edge wouldn't be as high of a priority. But realistically, I know he signed a 3-year deal. His contract's more of a 2-year, $14 million type of contract. You can keep him around for that 3rd year if he's playing at a high level. It's not a long commitment. You only have Bosa under contract for 1 year. You only have Epinesa for 1 year. So I still think, regardless, edge rusher would have been addressed. Maybe later in the draft, though, if Hoyt didn't have the suspension. Defensive tackle, though, yeah, they're desperate for a 1-tech. They have not really addressed that whatsoever. Ogunjobi is more of that 3-tech behind. Ed Oliver was, I thought, maybe going to be competition for Dwayne Carter for that backup role. So 1-tech is definitely a need, even with these 2 players that have been suspended, just because they really haven't addressed it. And I feel like in this draft class, the Bills probably felt the options were better here than what was available in free agency.
Yeah. Dwayne Carter, 6'2", 302, definitely fits more into that 3-tech role as well. So the Bills have some work to do with the big guys, the nose tackles, the guys that line up over center, and we'll see if they do that. All right. Thursday is a massive day, everybody. We're going to have a pod for you every day leading up to that day, but I wanted to shout out a couple of things. I am stopping out let me pull this up. Well, first of all, Ryan, tell them about Turning Stone, starting at about 7, 8 o'clock. That's probably what time you want to arrive. New York Rec and Social Club Thursday for the big shout watch party.
Yeah, come join us at Turning Stone, New York Sports and Rec Club. We'll be there, like Matt said, around 7, getting some sound checks and things done, but we'll also be out mingling with you Bills fans that are there in attendance. Once the draft gets going, they're going to have it on all their TVs. They're going to have the picks piped in, and then we'll go live on Shout, our podcast, around 9 p.m., but we'll be around before and after that as well, talking with you about potential scenarios for the Bills. Join us there, and then we'll have a second podcast much later that night after the Bills make their pick.
All right. So on the drive out to Turning Stone, I'm making a pit stop in Rochester. Danger and Battaglia from the Fan in Rochester are doing a pregame show at Three Heads Brewing on Atlantic Avenue in Rochester. I'm going to come out. I'm going to do a segment with them there on my way to Turning Stone. So it's going to be an absolutely jam-packed day. We're doing it big all across the 90 on Thursday, Ryan. We're hitting up Rochester, then we're hitting up our live show at Turning Stone right outside of Syracuse and Verona. It's going to be a big week, buddy.
Yeah, huge week. Can't wait.
All right, everybody, take care. Enjoy your week. We'll see you tomorrow.